The first crack of the whip cut through the humid Savannah air like lightning. Marcus didn't make a sound when the leather tore into his back. The only sign of pain was the way his fingers clenched around the iron bars of the whipping post, knuckles white against dark skin. Blood trickled slowly down the ridges of old scars, disappearing into the dirt at his bare feet. 20 lashes, Judge Beaumont barked, voice cold as steel. For corrupting my dead son's widow, for daring to touch what was never meant for you. Around them, the Beaumont plantation yard seethed with bodies, field hands forced to watch, house servants huddled in doorways, white neighbors invited like guests to a spectacle. The late afternoon sun burned low and orange, turning dust into gold, blood into something almost holy. Juliette Marie Beaumont stood at the edge of the platform in her black mourning dress, hair fallen loose from its pins, face streaked with tears and dust. She looked nothing like the composed young widow society had whispered about. She looked wild, desperate. "Stop this!" Her voice cracked as she tried to push past the 2 overseers, holding her back. "You're killing him!" Judge Beaumont turned on her with a glare that could have frozen the river. "You should be grateful, girl. I'm not sending you to the asylum. Yet, that Negro put wicked notions in your head. We are purging you of your sin." "It wasn't sin," Juliette sobbed. "It was love. I love him. I chose him. Do you hear me? I chose him." Gasps rippled through the white onlookers. Marcus lifted his head then, sweat and blood shining on his skin, and found her in the crowd. For a heartbeat, the noise faded. Only her eyes existed, blue, burning, terrified. "Juliette," he rasped, voice raw. "Don't. Beg them for me. They can take my body. They don't own my soul. You do." The whip rose again, glinting in the sun, and as it fell, as flesh split and the crowd roared, one question burned hotter than the pain. How did a grieving young widow in Savannah come to love a man the law called her property, and what price would they both pay for that love? Truok ki chungta ji sauvao banan long tam jaing hiet nganai, toi mon biet nhangai jang jong han chung toi jemnai. Ban jang lang ang hekau chuen nai tu tan fo hekwo gia now. Hai jelai bin luan bain duoe, kotoi biet nes. Before the blood, before the whip, before Savannah learned the name Marcus not as a slave, but as a man worth killing, there was quiet. Not peace. Savannah in 1846 did not know peace, but a quiet of routine, of heat, of unbearable stillness. The Beaumont plantation sat just outside the city, its grand white-columned mansion rising from a sea of cotton like a ghostly monument to wealth built on human suffering. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks like shrouds, swaying in the heavy, damp air. Cicadas screamed from morning until night. Even the river seemed to move lazily, reluctant to disturb the thick autumn heat. Juliette Marie Beaumont arrived at this world as an outsider. She had been raised in Charleston among scholars and musicians, taught French literature and piano sonatas, rather than the cold economics of plantation life. Her marriage, arranged between 2 powerful families, had brought her here only months before Edmund's sudden death. And in that short time, Savannah felt less like home and more like exile. The women of high society spoke to her with honeyed words and sharpened smiles. The house felt cavernous and cold, and Juliette herself, 21, newly widowed, draped in black silk she did not feel worthy to wear, felt like a ghost haunting a life not meant for her. The world of the enslaved, though only steps away, existed behind an invisible wall Juliette had never crossed until the day she met Marcus. The quarters lay at the back of the estate, a row of weathered cabins where generations of human beings had been worked, punished, bought, sold. The air tasted different there, more real, more painful, more alive. And at the center of that world moved Marcus. He was unlike any enslaved man she had ever seen, not because of his strength, though he had that in abundance, tall and broad-shouldered from years of labor beneath the Georgia sun. Not because of his beauty, though the fine contours of his jaw and the thoughtful lines around his eyes made him striking in a way Juliet couldn't ignore. It was his silence. Not the silence of submission. The silence of someone who had built a fortress within himself to survive. When he worked in the fields, his movements were precise, efficient, almost elegant, despite the brutality of the task. When overseers barked orders, he obeyed without lowering his gaze. When laughter erupted among the other enslaved workers, he smiled softly. Never mocking, never loud, just present. And his eyes, Lord, his eyes. Deep brown, with flecks of gold that glowed when sunlight caught them, eyes that held sorrow, intelligence, defiance, and something Juliet could not name. As she walked past him those first days, she felt those eyes brush against her respectfully, but with a depth that unsettled her. Not because it was improper, but because she sensed he saw her more clearly than anyone else did. Juliet herself was not the woman her neighbors believed her to be. They saw a porcelain widow draped in lace, fragile and delicate. But beneath her softness lay a grief so heavy it threatened to crush her. Edmund had not been a cruel husband. He had been kind, quiet, thoughtful, but distant. They had shared a few polite dinners, awkward conversations, almost no touches. His sudden death left her with a mansion, a fortune, and a hollow ache that felt shameful in its confusion. How could she mourn a man she barely knew? How could she not mourn him when he had shown her nothing but gentle respect? Night after night, Juliet wandered the halls unable to sleep, her small hands trailing along wallpaper she had not chosen, breathing air that felt too heavy for her lungs. She practiced her smiles in the mirror because society expected her to look dignified in grief. But inside, she was unraveling. She missed being seen, being understood, being spoken to without pretense. She missed feeling alive. It was in this lonely state that she stumbled upon Marcus sitting under the 300-year-old oak in the back garden, writing in a leather-bound notebook as if such an act were not illegal for a slave in Georgia. The heat was oppressive that day, the sky a pale, washed-out blue, the leaves still and limp in the air. Juliet had gone outside simply to breathe. Every room inside the house felt suffocating. She had not expected to meet anyone, especially not him. Marcus startled when she approached, snapping the book shut, fear flashing across his features before he could mask it. He rose quickly, posture straight, hands clasped respectfully behind his back. His voice, when he spoke, was low and smooth. "I didn't mean to intrude on your garden, ma'am." "It's not an intrusion," she said, surprising herself with the softness in her voice. "It's your home, too." He blinked, as if unsure whether she meant it. Juliet did not know then that these were the first words anyone had spoken to Marcus in years that did not treat him like an object. There were other secrets on the plantation, dark ones. Judge Beaumont, Edmund's father, ruled the household like a tyrant. Even in his son's absence, his presence loomed, in the rules enforced, in the overseer's harshness, in the air of fear that hung around the enslaved. Juliet feared him too, though he rarely raised his voice to her. She feared the way he spoke of Marcus, the way his jaw tightened when he noticed Marcus glance her way, the way his eyes narrowed whenever the young widow walked through the garden alone. He sensed something before even Juliet understood it herself. A danger brewing, a connection forming, a future he would rather burn than permit. But before all the fire, the blood, the courtroom, the running for their lives, there was simply a widow trying to breathe again, and a slave who had learned to hide his heart until someone looked closely enough to see it. The moment that changed everything began not with passion, nor rebellion, nor whispered confessions beneath the oaks. It began with a storm. Savannah storms did not arrive gently. They erupted, sudden, violent, loud enough to rattle glass panes in their frames. That afternoon, The sky darkened with unnatural speed, lightning tearing the horizon while thunder rolled across the fields like cannon fire. Juliet had taken refuge in the old library at the back of the mansion. It was Edmund's sanctuary, walls of books, a writing desk, a large window overlooking the garden. It was the only room that still felt like him, the only place where her grief softened rather than cut. She sat on the floor beside the window, hugging one of Edmund's poetry books to her chest, listening to the rain hammer against the world. A flash of movement outside drew her attention. Marcus was running across the yard, soaked in seconds, his shirt clinging to the lines of his back and chest as he struggled to secure a loose shutter on the side of the house. The wind fought him, slamming the wooden panel against the wall with dangerous force. A second later, a bolt of lightning struck somewhere close, too close. Marcus flinched as the shutter ripped free, its iron hinge snapping. The wooden board swung wildly and struck him hard across the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward into the mud. Without thinking, Juliet surged to her feet. The walls that separated mistress from slave, white from black, woman from the man she should never touch, they vanished in an instant beneath the instinctive terror that he might be hurt. She ran into the storm. Rain lashed her face, soaked her morning dress until it clung to her legs like heavy seaweed. She nearly slipped twice on the wet grass, but she pressed forward until she reached him. "Marcus, Marcus, can you hear me?" He was on his knees, one hand gripping his shoulder, teeth clenched in pain. Rain poured down his face like tears he would never allow himself to shed. "Ma'am," he gasped, trying to stand despite the agony. "You shouldn't be out here. Go back inside." "No," she said fiercely, reaching for him before she could stop herself. "Let me help you." Lightning flashed again, illuminating them in a stark white glow, her hand on his arm, his breath catching, the world holding still around them. For the first time, she felt the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. For the first time, he allowed himself to look at her without lowering his gaze. "Juliet," he said, her name slipping from his lips before he could recall propriety. The sound of it, soft, reverent, sent a tremor through her. She should have stepped back. She should have remembered the eyes always watching, the rules carved into Georgia's soil, the invisible chains that bound them both. Instead, she whispered, "So you're hurt." He swallowed. "It's nothing." She looked at the gash on his shoulder, already darkening with blood beneath the rain, and shook her head. "You're bleeding." A gust of wind nearly knocked them both over. Marcus steadied her at the waist, his large hand spanning the small of her back with ease. Even through the wet fabric she felt the heat of him, the strength, and something deeper, something forbidden. For a heartbeat, they stayed like that. Her breath against his throat, his hand on her waist, the storm raging around them as if the heavens themselves tried to warn them. "Come inside," she whispered. "Please." He hesitated, torn between obedience, fear, desire, and disbelief that she would speak to him this way. But when another crack of thunder shook the ground, he gave in. Juliet guided him into the library, her sanctuary, soon to become theirs. She shut the door behind them, shutting out the storm but not the chaos inside her chest. Marcus stood before her, dripping rainwater onto the rug, breathing hard, wounded and beautiful in a way she could not unsee. And in that small, quiet room filled with books and grief, the first barrier truly broke. The library was dim except for the storm's flickering light, thunder rolling like a warning drum across the sky. Rain pressed against the windows in sheets, turning the outside world into a shifting blur. Inside, the air felt suspended, as though the room itself held its breath once Juliet closed the door behind them. Marcus stood dripping on the carpet, water trailing down his broad shoulders, mixing with the thin line of blood seeping from the gash. He looked too large for the quiet space, too alive for a world that demanded he shrink himself. And yet he stood still, watching her with guarded uncertainty, as if waiting for the moment she would remember who he was supposed to be and step away. She didn't. "Sit," Juliet said, soft but firm. Please. He hesitated. Not out of defiance, but out of fear that accepting her kindness might cost them both more than they could bear. But when another wince crossed his face as he moved his injured shoulder, she stepped closer and guided him, hand at his lower back, until he sank into the chair by Edmund's desk. The intimacy of the moment didn't strike her until it was too late. She had touched him as though it were nothing at all, as though he were not a man the law considered inferior, as though her hand belonged there. Juliet drew in a shaky breath. "Let me see," she whispered. Marcus looked up slowly, rain still dripping from his lashes. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this." She knelt beside him, not because of rank or propriety or expectation, but because she needed to be close to understand the ache tightening her chest. "I know I don't," she said. "I want to." He exhaled, a rough, uneven sound that betrayed the pieces of himself he tried to keep hidden. She reached for his shirt, fingers brushing the soaked fabric. "May I?" No mistress had ever asked a slave for permission. Marcus nodded. She slid the wet shirt from his shoulders, revealing the truth of him in raw detail. His muscles, sculpted by years of impossible labor, moved like coiled strength beneath his skin. Old scars crossed his back like pale rivers. Newer ones marked his arms, but the wound was fresh, swollen and red where the shutter had struck him, oozing blood diluted by rainwater. "Oh, Marcus," she breathed, "this must hurt terribly." "I've had worse," he murmured. "That doesn't make this acceptable." Her hands were gentle as she dabbed away the water with a linen cloth. He didn't flinch, not from pain, but from the way her touch felt reverent, deliberate, as though she were memorizing him. The room seemed to narrow until nothing existed except the rhythm of her breath and the warmth of his skin. "This isn't the first time you've been hurt here," she said quietly, eyes flicking to the scars she could no longer pretend not to see. Marcus didn't look away. "No, ma'am." "Juliet," she corrected before she could think better of it. "When we're alone, call me Juliet." His breath caught. I don't want to disrespect you." "You won't." Outside, thunder cracked violently. Inside, something far more dangerous cracked open between them. "Juliet," he whispered, testing the sound of her name, tasting its forbidden sweetness. Her pulse fluttered. No one said her name like that. Not her late husband. Not her family. Not anyone. Until now. She pressed the cloth to his wound again, but her hands trembled. He noticed. "You're cold," he murmured. "Your dress is soaked through." The realization hit her belatedly. Rainwater clung to her bodice, making the fabric translucent in patches, clinging to her skin. Heat flushed her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around herself instinctively. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I didn't think—" Marcus stood slowly. "You ran into a storm for me. You could have been struck by lightning, and you could have died alone out there," she replied, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. Silence settled again, heavy, electric. "Why?" he asked at last, voice low, careful. "Why would you care what happens to me?" Her answer hovered between truth and terror. "Because you're the only one who sees me. Because you're the first person I've spoken to in weeks who doesn't treat me like a fragile ornament. Because when you read your poetry, I feel something living beneath my grief." But she said only, "Because no one else does." A shadow passed behind his eyes. Pain, understanding, something deeper. "You shouldn't get involved with someone like me," he said softly. "It's dangerous." "I'm already involved," she admitted. The storm howled outside as if echoing the truth that had slipped free. She stepped closer without realizing she was moving. Marcus didn't step back. His breath mingled with hers, his heart beat visibly at the base of his throat. Their proximity felt impossible, reckless, holy. "You saved pieces of Edmund I never knew," she whispered. "You kept his secrets. You learned because he believed in you. And now, knowing you, seeing you, it feels wrong that the world treats you as anything less than the man you are." Marcus swallowed hard. "Juliet, you don't understand what people would do if they saw you this close to me." "Then let them never see," she whispered. He shut his eyes briefly, fighting something inside himself. When he opened them again, nothing could hide the storm gathered there. Longing, fear, desire, restraint. "I shouldn't want this," he murmured. "But do you?" she asked. He hesitated. Then, barely audible, "Yes." Her hand rose, trembling until her fingertips brushed the rough line of his jaw. The effect was immediate. His breath shuddered, his lashes lowering as though her touch seared him. "Juliet, don't," he warned weakly. "Why?" she whispered. "Tell me why." "Because if you touch me again," he said, voice almost breaking, "I won't be able to pretend I don't feel what I feel for you." The confession hung between them like a suspended heartbeat. "What do you feel?" she asked, the question trembling from her lips before she could stop it. He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer, one slow, tortured inch at a time, until their bodies were nearly touching, heat radiating between them in waves. His hand rose and hovered just above her waist. Not touching. Not yet. Asking without asking. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. His fingers found the curve of her waist through the damp silk, and she gasped softly, her body yielding before her mind could form resistance. His other hand came to rest just above her elbow, steadying her, grounding her. Lightning illuminated the room in a burst of white. In that flash, their eyes locked, hers wide with yearning she had never allowed herself to feel, his blazing with a hunger he had buried for years. Marcus bowed his head, forehead nearly touching hers, breath mingling, his voice trembling with truth. "I feel everything I shouldn't." "Then feel it," she whispered. "Please." He made a sound, half desperate, half reverent, and in that moment the storm outside raged, but the storm inside them broke open entirely. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he pulled back just enough to look fully into her eyes, as if memorizing her before taking a step he could never undo. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, sending heat spiraling through her. "You don't know what this will cost you," he warned again. "I know what it will cost if I walk away," she said. Another life lived half asleep. A long, shuddering breath left him. Then he spoke the words that would bind their fates. "Then let me wake you." His lips met hers. Not in hunger, but in reverence, a soft press that carried every forbidden truth neither dared speak. The kiss deepened slowly, painfully, as though savoring every second before the world came crashing in. Her hands rose to his chest, feeling the strength beneath her palms. His arms encircled her carefully at first, then with growing certainty as her body pressed into his. Time slipped, breath tangled. Two lives that should never have touched intertwined in a single, impossible moment. When they finally parted, their foreheads remained touching, breaths shaky, hearts racing. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "Something we'll both burn for," he replied. "Something neither of us can stop." Their forbidden bond was sealed, not by desire alone, but by two wounded souls finding the one place they were finally seen. And neither understood yet that the house had heirs, that secrets rarely stay hidden. That love, once awakened, demands a price the world is eager to exact. The days that followed moved with the deceptive quiet of an approaching catastrophe, soft on the surface, deadly underneath. Juliet and Marcus became careful, precise, almost painfully restrained in the daylight. She avoided lingering glances at him during meals. He kept his gaze trained on the ground whenever Judge Beaumont, or any white visitor, was near. Their worlds separated again by necessity. But separation changes nothing once two hearts have awakened. It only sharpens the longing. At night, the air in the mansion grew heavy with silence. Floors settled, doors clicked softly, lamps dimmed. And in that fragile hush, Juliet felt herself gravitate back to the library, back to the last place she could still breathe. Marcus came too, never by arrangement, never by signal. He simply knew when she needed him, and she knew when he could no longer fight the gravity pulling them together. Their stolen moments remained innocent in form, whispered conversations, fingers brushing too long, the soft surrender of leaning against his chest when grief overwhelmed her, but the emotion beneath those moments grew intoxicating, unmanageable, and dangerous, critically, dangerously visible. The first crack in their secrecy came from the overseer, Mr. Langford, a man whose pleasure came from cruelty and whose ambitions rode on Judge Beaumont's approval. Langford began to notice things, how Juliet's eyes sought Marcus near the stables, how Marcus stiffened whenever she entered a room, how silence fell around them, not awkward, but charged. "Something's off," Langford muttered one morning, watching Marcus load crates onto a wagon. "A slave don't carry himself like that unless a woman's been foolish enough to look at him as a man." He spat tobacco into the dirt. "I'll find out." Marcus felt the weight of Langford's suspicion before any words were spoken. He caught the overseer watching him too often, lingering at doorways, walking the grounds at night with a lantern in hand. Juliet noticed too. "Marcus," she whispered during one of their evening meetings, voice trembling, "Langford is circling like a vulture. I don't trust him." "I don't trust him either," Marcus said, jaw tightening. "If he suspects anything, he won't stay silent. Judge Beaumont, He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Juliet knew. The judge's hatred simmered beneath a thin veneer of civility. Marcus had always been strong, composed, intelligent, traits the judge resented. If the old man discovered their bond, he would strike with the full weight of the law, the church and southern white society behind him. "Maybe we should stop meeting," Marcus said quietly. The words stabbed through her chest. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't say that. Please don't say that." "We don't have a choice," he replied. "What we feel, what we've done, they'd say it was my fault. They'd say I coerced you, that I'm dangerous." "You're not dangerous," she said fiercely, taking his hand. "I am to you," he said, voice breaking, "just by existing in your life." His hand tightened around hers. "I won't risk you, Juliet. I won't let them take your freedom because of me." Her breath shuddered. "And what about your freedom? Should you sacrifice everything to keep me safe?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't make me choose between survival and the only happiness I've known in years," she whispered. He cupped her cheek gently, thumb brushing away a tear. "Juliet, this isn't happiness. This is fire, and fire consumes everything." She leaned into his palm. "Then let it consume me." His resolve faltered. He kissed her then, slow, broken, aching, because resisting her felt like denying life itself. But fire attracts eyes. 3 nights later, the second crack split their world open. Juliet had retired early, claiming a headache at dinner. Marcus was finishing work in the barn. The house had fallen into its predictable rhythm. Judge Beaumont reading in the study, servants extinguishing lamps, the distant chirp of crickets beyond the veranda. Juliet waited until the halls were empty. Barefoot, heart racing, she slipped out of her room and made her way to the library. She opened the door and froze. The window was cracked open. Papers on the desk had been shuffled. A lantern sat strangely angled on the floor. A chill crawled up her spine. Someone had been here. Not Marcus. Someone else. Before panic fully formed, Marcus appeared at the door, shadows following him like a cloak. "Juliet, what's wrong?" She pointed at the scattered papers. "This room wasn't like this when I left." Marcus stiffened instantly. He scanned the corners, his instincts honed by a lifetime of danger. "They're watching us," he said under his breath. "Someone's looking for proof." Juliet's throat tightened. "Langford. Or worse," Marcus replied. "The judge." The room seemed to shrink around them. Juliet felt it then. The thong, longvo hinjang sayet, chatkoho. Every breath felt thinner, every sound magnified, every shadow hostile. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to stop meeting," he said again. "They're closing in." She shook her head, tears burning. "How do I pretend not to care about you? How do I walk past you like you're invisible? I can't." "We must," he insisted. "If they catch us—" A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They went silent. Marcus extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. He drew Juliet into the corner behind the curtain, just as footsteps approached. Langford's voice slid through the darkness like a blade. "Well now, someone's been busy in here. Let's see what secrets this room holds." Juliet felt Marcus's hand grip hers tightly in the dark. She didn't know whether Langford sensed them hiding, whether he could hear her frantic heartbeat, whether the next moment would bring discovery or escape. But she knew one thing with crystal clarity. Their love was no longer a secret. It was a hunted thing, a fragile flame flickering under boots, ready to crush it. Langford stepped deeper into the library, lantern lifted high, its glow carving long, menacing shadows across the bookshelves. Every flicker of light threatened to expose the two figures pressed tightly behind the heavy velvet curtain. Marcus held Juliet against him, one arm around her waist, the other braced behind her to shield her from view. Her cheek rested against his chest, feeling the tremor of his heartbeat. Steady, controlled, but faster than usual. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for her. Langford moved methodically, scanning the room, inspecting the disturbed papers, sniffing the air like a hound searching for scent. "I know someone's been sneaking around in here," he muttered. "Judge'll want to hear all about it." Juliet's breath hitched. Marcus tightened his grip just slightly. His silent way of saying, "I won't let them touch you." But even he couldn't stop what came next. Footsteps approached. He was coming toward the curtains. Marcus exhaled once. Quiet, resigned. Juliet felt the change in him, the way his mind had already shifted into protection mode. If Langford found them, Marcus would step out first, drawing attention to himself, giving her a chance to run. He was prepared to die for her. The lantern glow inched closer. Then, "Langford!" Judge Beaumont's voice snapped from down the hall. "Get out here, now!" Langford stiffened. "Sir, I think I found—" "I said now!" the judge barked, voice slicing through the quiet. Langford cursed under his breath, stomped across the room, and slammed the library door behind him as he left. For a long moment, Marcus and Juliet remained frozen, barely daring to breathe. Then Marcus exhaled sharply, forehead dropping to hers. "We can't stay here another night." Juliet nodded, gripping his shirt. "Then we run." "Tonight." He hesitated. "Your money, your belongings." "None of that matters," she whispered. "Only you." His resolve fractured. He kissed her, brief, fierce, full of the terror and love they had no words for, before pulling away. "We don't have much time," he said. "Pack only what you can carry. I'll meet you by the old oak in 15 minutes. She didn't want to leave him even for a second, but she forced herself out of the room and toward her chamber. That was when the house erupted. A gunshot cracked through the quiet. Juliet froze at the top of the stairs. Shouting erupted below, male voices, angered, frantic. Boots thundered across the floorboards. She recognized one voice immediately. Judge Beaumont. "Find them," he roared. "I know she's with him. Find them both. Bring the girl alive. And if the slave resists, shoot him." Juliet's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow Langford had put the pieces together, or someone else had seen. It no longer mattered. She ran back toward the library, skirts gathered in her fists. But before she reached the hall, a door beside her burst open and a hand seized her wrist. It was Marcus. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes sharp with urgency. "Juliet, the judge has men at every door. We need another way out." He pulled her into a servant passageway she had never noticed before, a narrow staircase spiraling down into the dark. They descended quickly, careful not to slip on the worn wooden steps. Above them, men stormed through the house. "Search the attic. Check every room. Judge says shoot the slave on sight." Juliet flinched. Marcus squeezed her hand. They reached a small door at the bottom of the passage. Marcus pushed it open, revealing a narrow exit behind the kitchen that led into the darkened yard. A lantern flashed near the barn, another by the river. Men were everywhere. "We'll go through the cane fields," Marcus whispered. "They won't track us easily there." They sprinted toward the field, staying low, using the shadows of the house for cover. The night air was thick with humidity, buzzing with insects and tension. Juliet's breath came fast, her lungs burning from fear more than exertion. When they reached the tall stalks of cane, Marcus pulled her into the dense foliage, where visibility dropped to almost nothing. Branches scratched their skin, dirt smeared her dress. None of it mattered. What mattered was survival. They moved deeper into the field, guided only by Marcus's sure steps. He had grown up in these lands. He knew their secrets. Then a dog barked. Marcus froze. Juliet grabbed his arm. "What is it?" "They've brought the hounds," he whispered. "They'll have our scent soon." Juliet's heart plummeted. "What do we do?" "We don't stop moving." Gunshots cracked in the distance. Torches flickered at the field's edge. Shouts grew closer. Juliet stumbled over a root, nearly falling before Marcus caught her. He swept her into his arms without breaking stride. "You'll slow down. I'd carry you across the whole South if it meant keeping you alive," he growled. She buried her face against his shoulder as he ran, dodging stalks, navigating dips in the earth with the precision of a man who had survived impossible things all his life. But even Marcus couldn't outrun everything. A shot rang out. Closer this time. The cane parted violently ahead of them as a figure burst into their path. Langford. Rifle raised. "Well, well," he sneered. "The widow and her pet." Marcus pushed Juliet behind him in one swift motion. "Move," Langford warned, "or I'll put a bullet right through your—" He didn't finish the sentence. Marcus lunged. It happened fast, a blur of strength and fury. He knocked the rifle aside as it fired, the bullet slicing through the air past Juliet's ear. The men crashed into the dirt, rolling, fists flying. Langford swung with the desperation of a cornered predator, but Marcus had the advantage of purpose, of love. He pinned Langford down, wrenching the rifle from his grasp. Juliet watched, trembling, as Marcus leveled the weapon at the man who had hunted them. Langford spat blood. "Go on, slave. Kill me. Prove you're the animal they say you are." Marcus's hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of a choice no human being should have to make. "Marcus," Juliet whispered, stepping to his side. "We have to go." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the decision crystallized in his eyes. He threw the rifle aside. "We're not the animals," he said. "They are." More voices approached, more torches, more danger. Marcus grabbed Juliet's hand. "Run!" And they ran, into the darkness, into uncertainty, into the only freedom left to them, each other. They ran until their lungs burned, until the cane thinned and the earth sloped downward toward the marshes that bordered the Savannah River. Mud clung to their feet, reeds tore at their clothes, but Marcus never slowed, not while Juliet stumbled beside him, not while the distant torches spread across the fields like a net tightening around prey. At the edge of the marsh, moonlight revealed the small skiff Marcus had hidden earlier that week, half submerged beneath reeds. He had hoped never to use it, but hope was a luxury they no longer had. "Get in," he whispered. Juliet climbed into the boat, trembling, her hands gripping the wooden sides. Marcus pushed them off the bank, water swallowing the skiff with a soft, ominous hiss. He rowed with strong, practiced strokes, guiding them toward the thick fog that drifted low across the water. The mist swallowed sound, light, the fear clawing at their lungs. Only when the plantation was no longer visible did Marcus allow himself to breathe. Juliet watched him, his jaw tight, his body bruised from the fight, eyes blazing with the fierce determination of a man who had decided that death was preferable to losing her. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He clasped it tightly. "Are you hurt?" "Only frightened." His expression gentled. "We're not safe yet, but we're alive, and we're together." She leaned into him, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. "What happens now?" "We follow the river north," he said. "There are abolitionists in South Carolina, people who help fugitives. From there, Philadelphia. A new life. A life where you're free, and where you're no longer chained to a house built from suffering," he replied softly. "You deserve more than that." "You are my more," she whispered. "Everything else can burn." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, overcome. As dawn spread pale gold across the horizon, the skiff drifted toward the mouth of a narrow canal, hidden by overhanging trees. Birds called from the branches. Water lapped gently against wood. The world felt reborn. Juliet rested her head on Marcus's shoulder. He kissed her hair, lightly, reverently, as though offering a vow no preacher or court could sanctify. "We survived," she murmured. "For now," he said. "But whatever comes next, I'll face it with you." She smiled faintly. "Even if the world calls it sin?" "Love is never sin," Marcus said. "Hatred is. Chains are. Silence is." They docked the skiff beneath a canopy of cypress trees. Ahead lay thick woods, winding trails, and a journey that could kill them. Behind lay men with dogs and guns who would not stop hunting them. Between past and future, Marcus turned to Juliet and cupped her face. "You can turn back," he said one last time. "If you leave me now, they'll forgive you. They'll take you home." Juliet shook her head, eyes shining with unbreakable resolve. "I left home the moment I loved you." He kissed her then, slowly, fiercely, with every ounce of devotion and fear and hope they carried. And when they broke apart, fingers entwined, they stepped into the forest together, not as mistress and slave, not as fugitives, but as two souls choosing freedom over fear, love over law, and life over survival. Their path would be brutal, their future uncertain. History would forget their names, but not their defiance. The river carried away their footprints, the fog hid their shadows, and somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the reach of whips and torches, the promise of a new beginning waited for them. The story is over, but the pain of that era still resonates. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening to this story alone or with someone? Share your feelings and where you are right now.